Hi, everyone. My name is Leah Swanberg. Welcome to our webinar for international intended parents who are considering surrogacy within Canada. It is great to have you here. I see people joining, so we will just wait a moment. If you have questions, please pop them into the chat on the right-hand side. If you have questions that you don't want to identify yourself as asking, please send them through a DM on Instagram, and I will be happy to ask our professionals these questions as they come up. That would be great. Again, welcome. Today, I am joined by Dr. Liebrecht of Create Fertility Center, a clinic located in Toronto, Ontario. This clinic works with the majority of those participating in surrogacy in Canada and has helped clients from all over the world become parents through whether IVF, surrogacy, egg donation, or using banked eggs. And they are absolutely a leader in this space. And we are so glad to have Dr. Liebrecht join us. There he is. So I will take it through. There we are. Perfect. And I'm also joined by Cindy Wasser of Hope Springs Fertility Law, a lawyer located again in Toronto, Ontario, who works with intended parents, surrogates, and egg donors all over the world and representing them in both the legal agreements initially, as well as the post-birth paperwork in several provinces now, as her law firm has expanded, and is absolutely your expert as you move through this process. So welcome to both of our guests, and I will bring Dr. Liebrecht on as well.
Thank you, Leah. Pleasure to be here.
Excellent.
And happy Canada Day tomorrow, everyone.
Thank you very much. I'm so happy to be here from Paris. Thank you. I'm so happy to be here from Paris, France.
Yes,
and
Dr.
It's 10 o'clock at night and the sky is bright.
Yes. So welcome. So we are going to begin this webinar talking about the medical process for those who are considering coming to Canada for treatment. And so Dr. Liebrecht, if you could talk a little bit about how people from anywhere outside of Canada would access a surrogacy program in Canada, medically speaking, that would be great.
Sure. So there are a number of agencies in Canada. CFC is the largest and our sort of go-to surrogacy agency because they have the quickest turnover for our patients, and that's amazing, and they're excellent at what they do. So they can often connect people within just several months and sometimes longer. Everybody's different, but we do work very closely with agencies to help them find surrogates and be able to provide the best possible care for them.
And in terms of the medical process, when you meet with intended parents who live abroad and want to use their sperm or use their eggs or neither, how does that consultation work? Are they able to do that virtually? If you could sort of walk through that medical intake process, that would be great.
Sure, that's great. We set up usually a video conference. We use Teams, and I'm able to speak to the intended parents directly and give them all the information they need to get the process started. I first take their medical history to make sure I understand all about their medical background and also what they're looking for. You know, a lot of same-sex male couples, for example, want to have a baby that's linked through the donor genetically, and we can provide that service for them, and it's a wonderful way to build a family for them. We also have single men that come to us, and we'll also provide service for them, and we have heterosexual couples as well and single women, so we can provide services through third-party reproduction for virtually anyone who comes to see us. And then once we have a medical history on the parents, intended parents, we then talk about how egg donation works. and go through the whole process of that. And then we follow that with the discussion of the surrogacy and how that works to provide them with all the tools they need to get started in this very complicated process.
Okay. And as you're working with intended parents and they are looking for an egg donor or looking for a surrogate, I know you mentioned it's complicated, and I think it can be. And I love working with partners that make it easy, which I think both you and Cindy do. If you could talk a little bit about how somebody briefly, I guess, would select an egg donor, what the criteria is that you look for in egg donors in your clinic, and what that looks like.
Okay. Sorry, I missed a little bit of that. So you wanted to know how we help people with egg donors. So generally
How
they
they
would
select them with you, like how
yeah,
you would be able to,
sure.
an egg donor.
Yeah. So what we do is we connect them with an agency. Our most common one is Egg Helpers that you're the director of, and we would look through profiles of surrogates to make sure that they really qualify from a medical standpoint to be an egg donor. And we want to look at their medical history to make sure it's safe for them to do this. And we also then want to assess them from their ovarian reserve, for example, to look at their anti-Müllerian hormone, or AMH, and that's a test for ovarian reserve, and that's very critical to understand like how many eggs they're likely to make so that they can be successful in providing enough eggs so that the family can be started. And we also look at their background in terms of any kind of issues related to having smoking and drinking alcohol and all kinds of things that relate to things that could affect their eggs, so that we can make sure that the intended parents will have the best quality eggs for their program. We also look, of course, at their full medical history. We look at their family history. We want to know about genetics, for example. It's very important to understand their background in terms of their genetics. And we do a full screening called a carrier screening. And that looks at over 600 genes. We want to look at that in the intended parents as well as the donor. And most of us, if you look at enough genes, will have some mutations, and they don't really affect our own health. In fact, some even have advantages. But if two people have the same mutation, then the baby could unfortunately have that particular disease. And if that happens, if there is a crossover or a common mutation between the intended parent and one of the intended parent and the donor, there's two options. One is just to say, well, this is probably not a good choice for us, and we'll select another donor. Or we can do genetic testing on the embryos to look for that particular gene, which is going to be a little bit more expensive to do, and also will reduce the number of embryos available for them to create a family. So it's something that we clearly want to look at to make sure we reduce the risk of abnormalities in the baby. And we also look at do a psychosocial screening with our counselors, who are excellent at talking to the donors and making sure they feel comfortable that this person would be a really good candidate to be a donor. And those are some of the major things that we do look at.
Excellent. And in terms of supporting or taking care of clients in parts of the world where legally they need to have a known egg donor, we're seeing that more and more in the EU. And so if you could talk a little bit about your known versus anonymous program, and how that maybe has shifted over the last number of years.
Yeah, definitely it has. In the past, most donors were anonymous so that the intended parents would have their medical background and psychosocial background, but they really wouldn't, have any access to their child to meet them or have some type of information about their own family. And so nowadays, there are sort of two ways people go about that. One is to have a donor who's willing to meet the child after the age of 18 when there's no parental legal support responsibilities. In other words, the child would be never be a chance that the donor herself would ever have to look after the child or be part of that, but they would have the access to their donor to be able to meet them and have some kind of relationship later in life. And the other possibility is to meet them early on, and the intended parents would meet the donor, and the child might meet them when they're quite young. And so that's another option. And it all depends a lot on the donor and what she's willing to do. And I think intended parents have to think about, what type of relationship they want to have in the future for their child and themselves with the donor. And if they want to have that type of relationship, we're very, very supportive of that. We feel that it's really such a personal decision for the intended parents, and our psychosocial counselors talk a lot about this issue, which is really critical, about how you want to see your family go in terms of the donor and what type of relationship you want to have. There are also anonymous situations, and that's also fine if that's what the intended parents prefer.
Excellent. And so people come to you, they do a medical assessment with you, they select an egg donor, and the donor goes through this screening process, and we're getting ready for IVF. Do intended parents, can they ship their sperm if they're working with an egg donor? Do they need to come to Canada? What is that process?
Absolutely. So during COVID, when travel was so difficult, we actually developed a unique process for them to be able to freeze their own sperm at home using a video to explain how to do it. And it's been very successful. And then they would have to have someone draw some blood, and then they ship their sperm and the blood to Canada. And we're able to look after them without them having to come to Canada. Nowadays, more people do. I always say we ship the intended parents, hopefully in an airplane, to come to Canada. So nowadays, more people are coming, but certainly, people have to take off work, and there's expenses involved in coming to Canada and spending time here. So we really encourage people to make their own decision about that. One thing I will say, though, is if the sperm count and parameters are normal, then the shipping process is excellent and works just as well. And we presented that actually at a meeting here in Europe about how our results were just as good either way. However, if someone does have a low sperm count or some type of parameter that's not normal, it may be better just to come here and freeze here.
Excellent. And so embryos are created. Now we're looking for a surrogate. So if you could tell the audience here what considerations are most important as they are looking for a surrogate, and sort of how you review a surrogate's profile in order to select them as an appropriate candidate.
That's a great question. So we look at their full medical background. We're assessing them to make sure we feel very comfortable with this person based on their medical history in terms of their ability to safely carry a pregnancy. We want, of course, the surrogate to come out safely after the pregnancy, and we also want the children that are born from them to be healthy and come out as good as possible. So I do a full medical history on the surrogate, and she must, in most cases, she must already have children. She must have no trouble giving birth if she's had children, and also she must be healthy. And so we really want to look at the background health. If she has a partner, we test their partner as well to make sure they don't have anything that could affect the pregnancy and the baby during the pregnancy. And we also do a urine toxicology test, as we do on the donor as well, to make sure they're not, for example, smoking cigarettes or taking drugs or any medications that they take that could affect the baby. And then we also look at have them come to Canada to our clinic to have an assessment in most cases. And sometimes they do it locally, but we do a physical examination. We do ultrasound on their uterus and ovaries. We look at the cavity. If they've had, for example, C-section, we want to make sure the scar is really well healed. And we also do blood work on them when they come to make sure all of the blood parameters are normal. And so surrogates go through quite an extensive assessment medically, and we also do the psychosocial assessment as well to make sure, again, we feel very comfortable with them to be a surrogate.
Excellent. And if you could give advice to intended parents who are watching and considering coming to your clinic or to Canada to become parents, what advice would you give them up front as they begin this process?
Okay, so I think when choosing a donor, one of the things you have to be careful about is being decisive, because you're not the only one looking at this donor, and there are other people too. And you want to make sure that you make a fairly quick decision. Otherwise, she'll be gone. If you try to look at many different websites and all these other agencies, you may actually lose the donor that you really like. So decisiveness is very important in picking a donor. When you're looking at a surrogate, there's a couple of things I think that are important to point out. First one is age. So when some people may think that, a 41-year-old surrogate is not as good as picking one that's 23, for example. Well, I think, maturity is a really important thing, and that a lot of surrogates who are older are going to have more maturity. They're going to be more set in life, and they're less likely to change their mind and have a match breakup. Whereas a younger donor, may, change her life during the time of this whole process, and there may be a possibility that might happen. I'm not saying not to pick a younger surrogate, but I think an older one could be excellent as long as she's healthy and she's had safe births. The other thing that people often talk about is the BMI, or the weight of the surrogate. And I'm a professor at the University of Toronto, and I do a lot of research. And one of the areas of strong research we do is in the third-party reproduction area. And one of the things I noticed over the years is that it didn't seem to matter if surrogates had a higher BMI or body mass index, that's also the weight of the surrogate, versus a lower BMI. And so, being the scientist I am, we actually studied this. And we found that there really was no difference with surrogates that had a higher BMI versus lower. And that's not true with infertility patients. Like, if someone's been trying for 5 years to have a child and they are at a higher BMI, their success is going to be lower. But surrogates are a select population of women who have already given birth at whatever BMI that they're at right now, and or close to it, and had very healthy, successful births. So their success rates are just as good. And I want to point that out, because I think that should not necessarily be a criteria to use to pick a surrogate.
I absolutely agree. And over nearly 20 years working with you and working with other clinicians, we have collected sort of our own data. And while body mass index, or BMI, is one indicator of health, I really believe there are so many other indicators of health when we are looking at gestational carriers and looking at those who work with them. And the internet is a big place. And so I think that often people can confuse themselves on information that they find there, rather than speaking to a physician who has the actual information. So thank you for that. I'm now going to ask Cindy to answer sort of some of the similar questions, but from a legal perspective. And so the first question I would have for you, Cindy, is, when people are considering surrogacy abroad, and specifically in Canada, what would you suggest that they do first? Who do they need to talk to there? Who do they need to talk to here? I would love your take on that.
Well, naturally, I'm going to say they should talk to me first, a lawyer. But I think the reality is, and what can sometimes be a tad confusing, is that the service providers all need to be spoken with around the same time. And so it seems a bit overwhelming initially, but I think you need all of our input. You need the clinic's input, you need the agency's input, you need the lawyer's input. And for people who don't live in Canada, we also want them to speak to a lawyer in their country. And so I don't think it matters which one of us is the immediate first or second, as long as we're all spoken with before any decisions are made. And that way you have all of the valuable information that you need to make a wise decision, an informed decision. With foreigners, it's really important that they speak to a lawyer in their country to find out what they need to keep the baby they bring home. What they're bringing home, if born in Canada, is a Canadian tourist. And so the lawyer in their country should explain to them what the process is to be recognized as the lawful parents in that country, because the Canadian order may not work. It may not be deemed valid. And in fact, in most countries, is not deemed valid. So they have to do something. And once they establish themselves as parents in their country, then they can provide their own citizenship to their child and keep it. So it's very important that they get that information. And often that lawyer will tell them that there are certain clauses or words that they'd like to see in the surrogacy agreement. So we want that information before we draft the contract. Other times, they tell us that there are certain requirements of the surrogate, whether she have her birth certificate apostilled, have a marriage license cleared that she's not married or is married. And then those are important things that the agency needs to know, because they shouldn't match them with a surrogate who won't be able to provide that documentation at the last minute, or they want to help the surrogate get that documentation together right away. So it's a big circle at the beginning, but I liken it to a big puzzle where the first thing we do is flip over the pieces and find the edges. Then we work in the little piles.
Absolutely. And so in terms of the next steps, once people have spoken to a lawyer in their jurisdiction or community and they begin the process here in Canada, what are some key pieces or tips that you would suggest people do in terms of drafting their egg donor? Like, do they need an egg donor agreement? Do they need a surrogacy agreement? And are there two lawyers? How does that piece work, if you would like to talk about that?
Great question. So let's start with the egg donor, because that comes first. So there's actually no law in Canada that requires one to enter into a contract between themselves and a donor. It is a matter of private policy for most clinics and agencies to demand it. And I support that. I think it's a good idea. I myself have an egg donor for my two children. And at the time when we did it, 18, 19 years ago, the lawyers didn't suggest it. And it's only because I'm very fortunate to have an angel that it never became a problem, even when we started anonymously and she became known. But historically, there was a great concern that the donor may be held responsible as a parent, and there may be not just access and custody issues, but most importantly, support issues. The law has changed over time, and virtually every province and territory in Canada has legislation that says a donor is not a parent just because they donated. There has to be intention. So in the typical couple that we deal with, somebody's a sperm donor, they're a donor, but they intend to be the parent. The egg donor they get from the agency is not a parent and won't be unless they make her one through a relationship, which typically would not happen in this situation. So you'd be more careful in the family or close friend situation. So the egg donor contract sets out the intention of the parties to clarify that, and very important when it is a friend or family member that it is clarified. And then the agency typically discusses with the parents, as I'm sure you'll explain, what her expenses will be. And so we want that clarified in the agreement as well. And then the clinics are wise to ask for evidence that a contract was signed before they start the protocol. So we send what we call a legal clearance letter to the clinic right after everybody signs it, saying there is a valid agreement and everyone knows what they're doing. And it's good for everyone to have it, because if there are any issues over, let's say, even disbursements later, that saves the agency a lot of trouble and hassle. It's been made very clear. If there's any issue about what the relationship was to be and whether the donor had proper clearance, it's all set out in the arrangement, in the contract, what consents were signed with respect to donating. So the clinic isn't going to find themselves arguing with anyone over it later. There's no misinterpretation or miscommunication. It's not an expensive endeavor, so it's highly, highly recommended. You also asked about the surrogacy contract. That's a bit different. In order to establish parentage in the provinces and territories where the baby's born, the law requires in some circumstances that there has been a contract signed by the parties in advance of conception, which in Canada is when the doctor transfers an embryo to the uterus, not before. So in some provinces like Ontario, where I am, British Columbia, now Nova Scotia, Quebec, and I think soon others, there is a format of getting an administrative birth certificate, administrative birth registration. And in those cases, there must be a contract. So in other cases, the judges want to see that the surrogate had independent legal advice, which is a requirement of those administrative processes as well. If the surrogate waives independent legal counsel, then at the time of the court order, that would be explained in an affidavit. But again, not having a contract, even if it's not absolutely legally required in every instance, is asking for a disaster, because this is a 40-page document. It sets out with great clarity all of the intentions, the expenses that will be compensated or dispersed to the surrogate through the agency, through reimbursements. It sets out the medical promises made, as well as what's going to happen after the birth, being in the hospital, the birth recognition order. All of those things are critically important. And most of us can file when there's a court order, we can file it online and wait for the judge to sign it. There's a good chance that if there was no contract and no independent legal advice, the judge is going to require everyone to show up in court and make sure that that surrogate knew what she was doing. So it's not a cost-saving issue. It's, in fact, it's one of those, a penny saved is not, a penny not spent is not a good penny saved. It's going to cost you a lot more not to do it. And again, we do a legal clearance letter for the clinic, making sure that they know the parties have entered into that contract. And some of the things we talk about for the clinic, for a foreigner in particular, is that they have purchased insurance for the baby once it's born. And while that may technically not be of concern to the clinic, I think Dr. Liebrecht doesn't want to be in a position where he's helped conceive a baby for foreign parents who have no insurance and are hit with a $300,000 or $400,000 hospital bill that creates a lot of pressure and anxiety and could affect the political will of our government to continue this. So his clinic is in a position with the letter to see that he should wait a few weeks or a month for the insurance to take effect. And it also tells them when for a contract to be valid in law, it needs a beginning and an end. So there's an expiry date, and we'll say they've agreed to do 3 or 4 transfers within this period of time, within the year. And then there's a heads up to let us know that that contract may be expiring. We can do a quick amendment. If it expires, it doesn't exist, we start again, which is too costly. So very important. For the agency's purpose, all of the expenses, the agreements are there, so it reduces, again, any miscommunication leading to anxiety and arguments. So very wise and very important for the surrogate to have her own lawyer that she can speak freely with in case she's having any issues with something like abortion, not just money, but a legal issue like abortion. We want her to feel very comfortable. Life support is another one. We want her to feel comfortable sharing her views to see if we can move forward. Sorry, I think I'm muted at the end.
Absolutely. And so as people now have an egg donor, have a surrogate, have had an embryo transfer, which we hope was successful, and carry on throughout the pregnancy, I'll pick up and talk for a few moments here. As an agency, or if you are going independently with a surrogate, we always suggest really getting familiar with the Canadian healthcare system and understanding what care looks like here, because if you are in another part of the world, care may look very different. And so as you're reviewing surrogate profiles and as you're becoming comfortable with the selection process, really looking at what pregnancy care is important to you, whether that's that the surrogate have a high-risk obstetrician and a hospital birth, or if you are comfortable with a surrogate who lists having a midwife and a home birth, really looking at all of those pieces, and then speaking to your agency or speaking even to your surrogate about what prenatal care looked like for her during the process. And so we, as an agency, spend a lot of time educating intended parents, talking about care in Canada, what that looks like, and then as well looking at leaning in, with your lawyer in terms of finding out. As you're drafting the contract, what is really important to you. And we hope you've done that ahead of time, but absolutely things may come up during the contract negotiations with your surrogate around termination of a pregnancy and her values and beliefs around that. Hopefully your agency has had that listed in her profile, but if not, it will come up at that point. So definitely to have that conversation. And then as well, looking at, as Cindy said, how many embryo transfers you're willing to attempt, what the, what that's going to look like for you. And we hope that you only need to attempt one and you have a successful ongoing pregnancy, but definitely to be looking at that as well. Agencies work really closely with the clinic to ensure that your surrogate is cared for while you are on the other side of the world, as well as care providers in Canada once she has reached 12 weeks in the pregnancy and is being cared for in her local community by an OB or midwife, really ensuring that that the clinic you work with has a great handoff process to that care provider so that there is a smooth transition and that you can hopefully be somewhat involved by Teams or FaceTime in those medical appointments, as this is your baby, and we really want intended parents to feel as though they are part of this pregnancy ongoing through the pregnancy. I would say as well, the other function of an agency really is to ensure that your surrogate has a place to park her expenses, to ensure that that you're complying with the current Canadian legislation, and having her really understand what that looks like from a practical perspective. We created an app so it would be a lot easier for her to scan her receipts and expenses to ensure that it's almost done through AI. So it just takes it in, tells us how much of the grocery bill we're reimbursing, and really, really is just a great smooth process for surrogates. And we find that many of the surrogates who come to our program come to us because we do have a large finance department that manages that piece. We do have a large coordinator program of 3 coordinators that take care of all of the support necessary for your surrogate. We also have a counselor on staff. And as you're looking at agencies, really looking at, do these people have enough people on staff that if someone's sick, there's someone else there? Because there are so many moving parts. And so, our clinic liaison, Maxine, works directly with Dr. Liebrecht's clinic, making sure that all appointments are booked leading up to the pregnancy and in those first 12 weeks. Kelsey books travel so your surrogate can get to the. Having all of these people to support your surrogate, in my view, really makes a journey go smoothly to ensure that you can focus on your relationship with your surrogate while other people focus on all of the details, all of the appointments, all of the travel, all of the all of the reimbursements, all of those pieces handled by someone else so that you can focus on the relationship. And so we do that, and I believe we do it really well, and would love to share more about that with you if you're interested. Please reach out to us after this webinar. And in terms of, I'd like to move sort of past. We've found the egg donor, we found the surrogate, we've supported her through the pregnancy. It's time for birth. Cindy, can you talk about the birth registration process in Canada, how it's different than the US, and this citizenship by descent piece that we keep hearing about, why Canada makes sense for, I hate to say foreigners, because I think of everyone as, a global citizen these days. So for people that live outside of Canada.
So let me just start by explaining it is a holiday weekend in Canada. Canada's birthday is on Tuesday, so many people have taken Monday as well off, or instead of. And the Supreme Court of the U.S. ruined it for those of us in this industry by releasing this decision amongst many on Friday when they shut down to have a summer vacation. The decision that everyone's talking about is called Trump versus CASA, C-A-S-A. It was released on Friday. Easy to Google CASA and Trump and it'll come up. What is important to understand, because there's a big myth, rumors spreading, saying that the Supreme Court of the US has upheld Trump's wish to deny citizenship as of right to babies born in the US. It did not do that. That is still the law. However, there is a real imminent threat that that right will be taken away within a short period of time. That threat does not exist in Canada. Our law is written differently and our constitution is different. So in Canada, our Immigration and Citizenship Act, which is a federal legislation that applies throughout, says that anyone who was born in Canada is a Canadian citizen. It does not depend on the citizenship or place of birth of the parents or their right to be in Canada at any time. Even if they're completely illegal, if they have a baby, that baby is Canadian. And generally the only way anyone is stripped of citizenship in Canada is if they commit high treason. It takes an awful lot. So Canada has been very clear, especially in COVID, of how it views the protection of Canadian citizens and babies. During COVID, the Canadian government made it its priority within the first 9 days of shutting airports down to change the Immigration and Citizenship Act to ensure that every foreigner having a baby via surrogacy in Canada was deemed a parent in advance without raising the issue of fetuses being babies, because it was only through surrogacy, so they could get here because other parents would have been here. So they called them parents so they could get on a flight and enter Canada, and worked with the transportation departments of all foreign nationals to get planes in and out. So that's how serious our government takes the protection of Canadian babies. Our government has worked tirelessly through European and UN agencies, through the Hague Convention meetings, to get other countries to recognize the Canadian babies and give them their citizenship in their home countries as well. And it's been the subject of some significant trade deals and threats. So we take it really seriously. Our Constitution is different than the US. So the ability for the government to change that is not as easy as an executive order. It would take years of drafting through the whole legislative process. It's a constitutional issue. it would be known for like 6 years before it happened. So the way this has happened in the US is that Trump said, and did this like right away, he signed an executive order, which he has the authority to do, to say that although the law says anyone born in the US is a US citizen and can be subject to the US laws and protections, he said if the parent is not a US citizen, either mother or father, and if one of them is not there as either a permanent resident or a citizen, then that child may not be granted American citizenship. And then 3 different states challenged it with a number of individuals. So there were dozens and dozens of plaintiffs challenging this in the 3 states. And they went to the federal court in those states, and their court system is different. And the court said Trump can't do that across the country, period. All federal courts said that. So Trump took it to the US Supreme Court, which said on Friday, the federal court of a state cannot say that it applies across the country. They can only say the executive power doesn't apply in this state, and also only with respect to an individual plaintiff. So each person challenging their baby's right to be a citizen, or their right, has to apply. They also opened the door to a class action, which these organizations have already started filing, making it very complicated. And it gave Trump 30 days to amend and do what he needs to do. And Trump has said, I have hundreds of executive orders, many, 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 and I'm doing this right away. And we know his Attorney General, Pam Bondi, is on this. It's probably already written. I wouldn't be surprised if everything's re-signed in the next couple of days. And so he will have the authority to say no more American citizenship, and anyone having a baby in the US via surrogacy will have to apply individually or through a class action to challenge it. And as of this moment, I'm not aware of any American legal organization that is putting it together. That doesn't mean they aren't. I'm just not aware because they're a little busy, I assume, if they're doing it and not telling me, because they don't have time, but they will, I'm sure. But it makes it very dangerous, in my opinion. I personally would not have a baby in the US if I was a foreigner, because it takes you a long time to get your passport. So you will be stuck there. You cannot leave the country without the American passport unless you get your country's passport. So you know how long it takes. You have to be determined the parents in your country. For Canadians, it's a bit different because, one, you can drive over the border right away. But if you need to fly, the Canadian Embassy is going to issue you a passport fairly quickly, but not so for other countries. So Canada has become a very safe haven for so many reasons. Birthright, of course, with it being Pride Month, and today the big Pride parade in Toronto, which is well known across the country. It's important to note that we respect LGBTQ rights. And it is just generally a safe place for the babies. And the culture is such that everybody is welcome and protected. Just have health care for the baby, please.
And I know that for a lot of you listening, it might sound confusing. You'll have this Canadian baby that you will travel home with, and Canadians are covered by our health care. What we know is that the babies born here do not meet the residency requirement to receive healthcare. And we know that the intention is that they're going to leave Canada. And our requirement of intended parents is that they can share with us their insurance if they work for a large sort of multinational company. Many are providing health benefits that work for surrogacy or for children born through surrogacy. And if not, we work with Baby Shield, who does a great job for our intended parents. And we suggest you contact them early and get insurance in place so that you don't have to worry about this piece at all. And so as we wrap up, I am checking for questions, and just give me one moment because I saw one on Instagram.
And there's still a glimmer of light in the City of Lights at 10:49.
Yeah, it's beautiful there.
It's beautiful.
It is my favorite place, my second home.
Excellent. Okay, my last question is for Dr. Liebrecht. These intended parents have heard a lot about guaranteed programs in your clinic, and they wanted to know how they could get more information about that.
Sure. So we have three different guarantee programs. One's a guarantee of one baby. We have a guarantee of two babies, and we have something that's been set up for same-sex male couples, which is often their desire to have a guarantee 1+1, meaning one baby for each of them. And our financial people can go through the details of that. At a high level, basically, we're guaranteeing a baby, or a significant portion of the money is given back to you, and you have to use up all the embryos that are created. And there would be a second donation if the first donor doesn't work, and then only after that would there be a reimbursement. But the odds of that is very low. With all the embryos that we create, the odds of a pregnancy is extremely high. In fact, we're seeing about 70% pregnancy on the first try and about 70% on the second. So, around 90% of people are having a baby or a pregnancy after two tries. So the odds of having that situation is very low, but it gives you a peace of mind knowing that if you spend a lot of your hard-earned money to do this, that we're going to stand behind the fact that we'll be guaranteeing the pregnancy for you, or a reimbursement. But the details of that, we have our financial people that will actually give you a call before you speak to me to make sure you understand the costs and all of the factors that are involved in the guarantee programs.
Excellent. The other question I had, it's a question for me, but an intended parent asking if they're able to use their employee benefits that they have for surrogacy with our agency or with other service providers. And the answer is yes, we are able to provide you with an invoice or a receipt for our services that you can submit to your HR department, which many people are doing. So many more companies are opting into programs such as Progeny or Carrot, or they are working with other employee-based healthcare plans or health spending accounts. And we would love to connect with you on that, as we have found the world is finally waking up to the fact that infertility is a disease that affects 1 in 6. And further to that, there are many intended parents who are single or same-sex couples where surrogacy is the way that they are going to complete their families. And so we are very excited to see that wake-up call in the world. So thank you for that question. Catherine, you're very welcome. Thank you for your comment. So for those of you who are interested in learning more, please send us a note and we will get you introduced to Cindy and Dr. Liebrecht. If you registered for this but weren't able to stay for the whole thing or had to pop on and off, we will get this recording sent to you. And for those of you who didn't leave your email in the Eventbrite, please send it along to us so we can get the recording out to you. So thank you, Cindy. Thank you, Dr. Liebrecht. And yeah, best of luck to everyone as they begin to dream about building their families.
Thank you, Leah. Thank you, Dr. Liebrecht, and good luck to everybody. I'm here to support you.
Thank you.
And I ditto that we're here to help you have a baby, and we're going to do everything we can to help your dream come true.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Bye.